everyone, and welcome to Book Solid. We're your hosts. I'm Soraya.
And I'm India, and for this week's episode, we're going to be discussing The Nest by Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeney.
And before we get started, we just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for tuning in and supporting our show with each episode. We're just about to hit our 2-month mark and break 1,000 downloads, and we're so grateful to each of you and for the incredible feedback that we've gotten so far. Our show has grown in such a short time, and we have some really, really exciting things that we'll be sharing with you soon. We also wanted to share that we recently launched a GoFundMe campaign. As our show keeps growing, we really want to make sure that we can keep up and keep bringing you all the best possible content. If you're interested in learning more about it and where our donations will go exactly, we'll have a link in our show notes. And if you prefer to support us in other ways, you can subscribe to our show wherever you're listening, follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, you can leave us a rating and review. Thank you so much to all of you.
Spoiler alert! Hey guys, just as a heads up, we will be revealing spoilers in this episode. If you haven't yet read the book or seen the show or film, this is a courteous reminder to proceed with caution.
So, I guess just jumping right in, do you want to just go through each sibling and we just kind of give our thoughts from there?
Yeah, that sounds good.
I know every single episode I say this, but Irredeemable is coming to mind with Leo.
So from that very first, even in the prologue, we get a pretty good sense of who he is. He talks about how he's drunk, he was doing cocaine, he's ditching this party that he's at with his wife to go have sex essentially with this 19-year-old under the guise of helping her with her career. So that in and of itself, even before the accident, I was like, okay, so this is telling me exactly who he is. And I think throughout the book, I was really waiting for this moment for him to wake up, to change, to have some kind of character arc, any growth. And he really did not. And I have so many instances in my notes of things he did that drove me up the wall. The very first one being when he met with his siblings and he lied about having money to pay them back because they used their share of their inheritance, not willingly, but to bail him out of that mess that he brought upon himself. So he had the funds to pay him back. He lied and said he didn't. He basically used Stephanie for his own gain. Sure, he tries to say he has feelings for her, but the second things got difficult. He bailed. He didn't even tell her the truth about what happened. He doesn't really seem to care about what he did to Matilda. I feel like he does not care that this woman has now lost her entire foot because of his actions. Yes, she got in that car willingly. Yes, she knew that he was married, but he really manipulated her because, she was a waitress. She was serving his family and he had a position of power of saying oh, I know a lot of people. I know you want to be a singer. I can help you. And she was vulnerable and she took that opportunity. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me that was just Leo, there's nothing he can do in my eyes that will change how I feel about him, was when he saw B's manuscript and realized it was loosely based on what happened with him and Matilda. And he was thinking about how, if word got out, people were going to judge him or talk about him. And he said, and I quote, "They would conveniently ignore or downplay how he made her a millionaire and only really focus on the fact that she lost her foot because of him." And I'm like, you really hold yourself up in such high regard in your head that you made her a millionaire? Do you think she'd really have the millions or her foot back? Because I think she'd have her foot. So it's just he is constantly trying to justify his actions, excuse his actions, and there's no accountability whatsoever. So that was very long-winded, but I have a lot of feelings about him. I really didn't like him.
Yeah, no, I feel like you hit the nail on the head. I just I know not every single character, there are stagnant characters. They're placeholders. They're there to move the story along. But I wonder and I question why we never saw even a glimpse of a redemption arc, because he just, the whole time I'm reading, waiting. He gets out of rehab and we're thinking literally moments after he gets out of rehab, he goes to buy cocaine before meeting with his siblings to discuss the nest. And then he backs out because he sees his nieces, his twin nieces. And I think that kind of, so I'm like, okay, so we're seeing some kind of growth. And then that just stops. But I feel like I'm not sure when the book came out in relation to the Me Too movement. But I couldn't help but think of Harvey Weinstein and just a lot of just in the film industry, male powerful, top performing guys who would exploit women who were looking to enter the film industry as actors. And, you know, they promise them, I'm going to get you this deal, I'm going to get you this gig, I'll connect you with the right people, but first you have to do insert something wildly inappropriate, usually sexual. And I couldn't help but think that with Leo. Like you said, he's manipulating her, and then he doesn't feel, she lost her foot. You know, and it's also, she definitely holds herself accountable for, you know, skipping out on work to essentially hook up with this older man. But Leo, you're the one more so in the wrong, I feel like, just because, you know, yes, she's 19. Yes, legally she is an adult, but I believe he's like in his 40s or so. So, you know, we have roughly 20-year age gap here. I couldn't help but feel like he was exploiting her for sexual reasons, and then has no remorse whatsoever. Like you said, she loses a limb. You know, this is literally how we walk. And then there's the whole element of her family being undocumented, and how all of the Plumb siblings really uses that to their advantage is sickening and awful.
And from what I understand, I don't think he even really knows anybody in the music, and like it's just a ruse, you know. It was just another way for him to try to get what he wants, because that's a recurring theme in this book, is he constantly feels like he is owed something, or that he should get what he wants, and it just like, he just reeked of privilege. I could not stand him as a character at all.
Yeah, that's the perfect word, I feel like, privilege. I couldn't help but think that with each sibling story, especially in relation to the nest. I don't know, just talking generally, you know, they're in New York. They each have, for the most part, established careers. I know B's she kind of feels like she's settled in a way, or she knows that her ex-friends think she does, and that affects how she views herself. But I don't know, this idea of privilege, and I'm like, you know, do you really need that money that badly, you know? And so that kind of threw me off.
And like, you made the choices that brought you here because you were expecting this money. And like they pointed out multiple times, that money was never even supposed to be the amount that it was. And so like, you guys kind of really took a gamble, each of you, on your lives, because you're waiting on this money, and the money never came. So a lot of the predicaments that they find themselves in, like Jack getting that second loan or second line of credit on their house or something like that, and then Melody taking out like another mortgage, and they're in these really precarious situations. She can barely afford to, you know, buy new clothes for her children, and she has no idea how she's going to afford college. And Beatrice was the only one who was financially stable, but it was because of a previous relationship, which we'll get into. And then, as we know, Leo, he has that money offshore, but he's, you know, trying to find a way to make it again in New York. But like, my point is that they're all in this situation because of their own behavior. No one told Leo to gamble his money away the way he did when he was with Victoria. You know, they were just like throwing their money away. And so they're like, well, the nest is coming, and they centered their lives around this thing that completely backfired.
Yeah, and it's just like, where is the accountability? You know, like you said, every single decision that each of the siblings makes, it directly impacts their wealth later in life. And Melody, I'm sure we can get into her in a second, because I have a lot of thoughts on her. But just quickly, before we go further into the siblings, just touching on their mother, Francie, I believe. It's really interesting because I can tell just from their initial conversation when they're discussing the nest. And then, you know, of course, the other siblings find out that once Leo gets into this accident, a large sum of the nest is used to, you know, hospital fees, all that, and also quiet everyone and everything, because it will ruin his career and all that.
What career?
Like, literally, please. What work have you done? Please, enlighten me. But long story short, so Francie is described as being a cold, kind of detached woman. She had some issues with alcohol abuse, especially earlier in their lives when they were younger. But I get the sense, and she says it in their conversation, she's like, I didn't raise you guys to be this way. You're basically saying you're greedy. You know, I'm not happy that you guys turn out this way. but she also doesn't really like care.
Yeah.
You know, she says all that and she's like, okay, anyways, bye. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not forcing Leo to pay you guys back. Anyways, like, carry on.
Very detached. And what I think makes me the most angry about Leo's character is not only does he never hold himself accountable, nobody in his life holds him accountable to any of his actions. Except maybe Jack is the only one who like sees through the BS. But everyone else, for Francie to like bail him out, no hesitation, and to take that from their siblings, her other children who are waiting on this money, who've made plans around this money. I mean, we discussed that was a flawed thing, but it's what the situation was. And then Beatrice, by listening in on Matilda's parents' conversation and telling their cousin George, the lawyer, and Leo that she overheard that their parents are undocumented. And so using that as leverage, that was such a horrific thing to do, like you said, because it's punishing her for Leo's mistake and preventing her from getting the justice that she deserves in that situation. And so I feel like because Leo always has people coming to his rescue, he doesn't think that he ever does anything wrong because no one ever tells him that he does. And that's just such a toxic way to be.
Yeah. No, yeah, I completely agree. And just quickly going back to Beatrice, I don't know, when it was revealed that she basically exposed Matilda's family and was using that as incentive to protect, or not incentive, but using that to protect Leo, because I mean, aside from that, she was one of the few characters that I could kind of empathize with. I felt like she was written well, but I'm like, again, here's this idea of privilege. Anytime there's a roadblock in the way, they immediately react like toddlers or like little kids when like you say, okay, you can't play with that toy or don't touch that in the store, and they start crying. And I'm like, okay, but you guys are all adults now, and you've never developed the necessary skills to deal with adversity, and so now we just have 4 grown adults whining.
Yes. That's basically what the entire book was these 4 people whining about situations that they put themselves in. So it was very hard to feel bad for them because you all made these choices. Nobody made you make these choices. It sucks what happened to the nest and that you're not getting this money that you thought you were going to, but like that was such an impractical way to live. And so, yeah, like it was kind of annoying to listen to them whine and complain about stuff that they brought upon themselves.
And just generally, I have like a clarifying question for you. So from what I understand, in the very end, they don't get the nest, of course. And so B, she kind of decides that she doesn't need the money, her portion of the money. And so she decides to split her shares with Melody and Jack. And then Leo literally disappears off the face of the earth. And then that's just it, right?
Yeah. They're building up this thing and then they don't get it.
Right.
I feel like we're kind of moving away from the siblings here, and I know we'll get back to them in a second, but I think my biggest issue with this book, and I'm sure you all can kind of tell from the way we're talking that we weren't totally crazy about this book. I wouldn't say like I hate it by any means. I just have like issue with some of the characters and some of the plot lines, but I think one of my biggest issues with it is it was presented as a story about siblings who have kind of lost their way with each other, but throughout the course of this book are supposed to like find their way back to one another or renew their relationships as adults. Because I think sibling relationships are very complex ones. You have one relationship as children and another as adults. And it's really interesting to see that transition. So to me, it was supposed to kind of see how they kind of form a relationship as adults later in life. But I don't really feel like we got that. It just was kind of in the last 50 pages. B decides to give up her share. Everyone's all happy at Lila's, Stephanie's baby's birthday, and then that's it. So I don't know. I just kind of felt like there was something missing there.
Yeah, I agree. Not everything has to be this perfectly happy ending. It's okay to have tragedies. It's okay to have contention and drama in the story. And I don't think either of us are really contesting that. But I just wonder, if like as far as like redemption and growth of the characters, because I'm trying to think if any of the characters really have, like I know Jack, I guess we could kind of segue into him in a little bit, but so he does a series of actions, essentially just some sketchy dealings with money because he knows that he can't really trust Leo to get his money from the nest. And then eventually his husband, Walker, finds out and dumps him. They get a divorce, they split. And so I think he kind of feels some remorse in the end. He's just like, I screwed up, I dropped the ball. But I didn't really get the sense that he regretted his actions.
Yeah, let's get into Jack, 'cause I think that's really interesting too. And it's not like this was like a fling. These people were together for over 2 decades, they said. And I feel like there was even a point early on in the book where Jack said if Walker found out what he was doing, he would leave him. And that somehow wasn't important enough to him to make him change his behavior. You know, he kind of just took it, to me, he took it as, well, I guess I have to be more careful that he doesn't find out, instead of, let me stop this current path I'm on so that I don't lose this relationship. Like, I feel like they're all kind of selfish. And so Jack really prioritized what he wanted and what he thought he needed over Walker's feelings, because he knew exactly how he would feel about this. And so, yeah, that I wasn't a fan of that. I feel like he, as much as he detests Leo, he was just as selfish in his actions as Leo was.
Yeah. And I felt like, in terms of sibling dynamic, that was a part of the book that was really interesting to me. It made sense, in my head, I pictured Jack being envious of Leo because, of course, for whatever reason, Leo must be, Leonardo DiCaprio again. Like, I'm trying to picture, whatever it is, his charm, his appeal. A lot of times they describe that, when characters spoke with him, he made them feel like they were the only person in the room. And, he's very charming, and I get that. And I can tell Jack definitely envied that about him. And I felt like that, focusing on more aspects of that and like the sibling dynamic would have been really interesting. And I know like they kind of paired off in a sense. So it was like Leo and B, and then Jack and Melody kind of. But yeah, just with Jack, I felt like you said, he wasn't all that different from Leo. He was very selfish. He made a series of bad, so he has a business, and he says like his business doesn't really produce a lot of income. It's more so a passion project, and his husband's okay with that. From what I understand, the husband provides most of their income in their relationship. But then I forget what exactly happens that he has to take out, or he starts seeking other money.
I think it was to drive. I remember one part, him talking about driving more business into his store, so he would revamp something in the store or what have you. And so those like alterations started adding up, and so he started seeking money elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, honestly, kind of like good for Walker for leaving him. And especially like when Walker, there was a part at the end where he talked about thinking he could forgive him or they could move past it, or even just having a conversation, because Jack swore up and down that he had canceled the sale. And then when he walked into their room to go talk to Jack, he could hear him on the phone negotiating the sale. So he just lied again. And it's like, Walker, you don't need that. Like, move on, keep it trucking. Jack is 40 whatever and has a ton of growing up to do still, so.
Yeah, and just even like once we first are introduced to Jack, I believe they're at some like ritzy bar in New York, and immediately, I'm one of those people who believes that you can always tell someone's character by how they interact with folks in the food industry or just food service in general. And so he's very snappy with the waitress, I believe. He says his drink's made wrong, and the whole time Walker's just like apologetic and trying to mediate the situation. But it's pretty apparent that Jack was overreacting, especially since, he's a regular at this bar. So I'm like, wouldn't you have an idea? I mean, I don't know. The drink could have been made wrong for sure, but it was how he approached it. And I felt like that was really clever on behalf of Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeney, just because, just little details like that. We know Jack is very high maintenance. And I get that, in relationships, there's definitely sometimes going to be that yin and yang kind of balance. But Jack's actions, they just kept getting worse and worse. And like you were saying earlier, so he was seeking out additional money to revamp his business, but he keeps going down that rabbit hole, and he's like, well, I need more money to do this and more money to do this, and all the while never updating Walker on any of this. And so yeah, I don't get the sense that after their divorce, I mean, he was sad and he's like, okay, like you said, they were together for 2 decades. And he's just like, well, I still need my money.
Yeah, seriously. And that's a good point. I forgot about that initial intro to Jack where he talked to the waitress like that at the bar. And I could never be with someone who treats people that way. Like, I don't know, to me it screams insecurity because you feel like because this person is serving you and you are paying them that you can treat them any which way. And I hate that. That's just something that really, really bothers me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it kind of touches on, I think the last episode we talked about when we worked together at our old job on campus. For whatever reason, when we're in the office, everyone can talk to us any kind of way, but then outside of campus, outside of the office, on campus, in our classes, it's, hey, can I borrow the notes? And hey, do you want to be in my project?
And like people were mean. Like, I don't want you guys to think we're overreacting.
Yeah.
Like, no, these were straight up students who we lived in the same dorms with who treated us so poorly the second we stood behind that desk.
Yeah, and just snappiness. I mean, we didn't really handle cash and money directly in what we were doing, but an equivalent would be, say you go to the gas station and the cashier puts out their hand for you to give them, money to pay for gas or whatever, and then you throw the bill on the counter. Just stuff like that. Lots of like...
Or like, say, to use that analogy, because like India said, we didn't handle cash, but we did like exchange things for people. And it's like, say you're going up to pay, and instead of telling them what you're buying and what you want, you just walk up to the counter and throw your money and then stare at them and expect them to just read your mind and figure out what you want.
To that point, I did kind of wonder that moment. Like you said, I'm sorry, I couldn't stay with someone who behaved that way. And I could tell that Walker definitely felt like he had to kind of compensate for that in that moment. But it was kind of, it was foreshadowing, of course, the end of the relationship. It was pretty clear that they were incompatible, but yeah, Jack was just all about the money.
All about himself, all about his money.
Yeah.
Let's move into Melody.
Yes. Melody. Okay, so with her, I just quickly want to say the first thing that came to mind when we were first getting more insight onto like her backstory, which by the way, with all the characters, I mean, you already said this, but like I yearn for more backstory because it was genuinely fascinating seeing the lives, especially with the twins, what they were up to. But this concept of helicopter parenting and just the stalking app, and I don't know, I was getting almost Elena vibes from our Little Fires Everywhere episode at times. I said this before in another episode, but I think it was The Vanishing Half, but like this idea of strict parents create sneaky children. I felt like that kind of happened.
Yeah. And it was really interesting to me when Nora came out to her and Walter, her husband. It was really nice to see that Walter at least was very accepting and like immediately accepting. It didn't change anything for him. He didn't have to think about anything. Like he just treated her like he always did. And so that was nice because I was really nervous for Nora going up to that because I didn't know like how her parents were going to react. And she was very, we got to see a lot of how she felt about having to tell them. And I just like wanted them to accept her and for everything to kind of be okay. And so I don't know, it bothered me that Melody she was like, well, I just don't know how to talk to her anymore. I don't know how to treat her. I'm like, the same way you always have. She's still your daughter. That's still like nothing in your relationship has changed. I just thought it strange because much of the book focuses on this like immense love that she has for her children. And that's why she has the stalker app and, why she's such a helicopter parent, because she's always talking about like what she doesn't know what she would do without them or if something happened to them. And so if that's how you say you love them, there should be nothing that changes that love that you have for them. But then when Nora came out to her, it did cause like this rift and she had to learn how to accept it. So I just thought those were combating parts of her character. It didn't really make sense.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So although we do kind of get this like, glimpses at redemption as far as her mentality on money, the way she handled Nora's, coming out in a way, and also just the way, the twins, Nora and Louisa kind of knew, like she saw Nora and Simone kissing at the museum one day, but eventually they have this, very emotional conversation at Melody's birthday, I believe. I think it's at Jack's house, and they like sneak off into his room to have this heart-to-heart conversation. And they come to terms with it, like Louisa's crying, and then Melody barges in, demands to know what they're talking about, and she's just so aggressive. And I just was, I don't know, I wish she didn't take that approach because, like, her abrasion, okay, it's very clear, like, emotions are raw, tensions are raw. And so for her, she forced her to come out and then was like, oh, absolutely not. And then I thought it was also interesting how in the book they discuss how Melody's brother, Jack, is gay. And one of the characters says, like, okay, well, your brother's gay. You know, you're okay with that. Why are you having trouble with your daughter? You're coming to terms with her sexuality. And she was like, that's different. I don't know. Like, she doesn't have a reason.
Right.
And I understand, you know, maybe she needs a moment to get adjusted to things. But like you said, you know, this concept of helicopter parenting stemmed from her parent. She cared about her daughter. She, you know, constantly she's talking about safety. She made them think that, and I've actually never been to New York. So all that I know is from the media, but, and like any other place, you know, there's going to be quote unquote safe areas and dangerous, more dangerous areas. But from what I got, Melody was just like, it's all dangerous.
Yeah.
You go to school, you go to home, that's it. And so, of course, the girls are like, we need to explore because Simone's living her best life. Everybody else is.
And as soon as you tell a kid, teenager, whatever, that they can't do something, like, guess what they're going to want to do.
Right.
You know? Like, it's just a matter of time. I feel like you said, it's just safer and wiser to give them that freedom, but just give them the tools to navigate that freedom properly. Mm-hmm. To keep themselves safe, you know, instead of just being like, lock you in your room, in the highest room on the tallest tower, and that's that, you know?
Right. Yeah, Melody she was, and then also just her relationship with her husband was kind of,
I feel like he was willing to sacrifice a lot to make her happy, and she was not willing to do the same. It was a very one-sided relationship.
Absolutely. And like, we even see that in the home. So from what I understand, like, she goes on a walk one morning. She's walking the twins or something. Yeah. She spots the house. It's a fixer-upper. It's going to cost a lot of money. But it's on, like, literally, I picture, like, railroad tracks or something to that effect. The good side of the tracks and, like, the bad side. She's like, we need to, like, keep up with the Joneses and the PTA moms. And she has this idea of perfection. And meanwhile, her husband's just like, actually, no. Like, that's not really realistic for us right now. She's very intent on having a college fund for both of the twins, and she specifically has private colleges in mind. I'm like, have you talked to your kids at all? Yeah, is that what they want?
Also, I don't know what's so bad about a state school. Like, okay, we went to a state school and it was fine and I loved it, and I'm also not hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt now for the same degree. So like, I don't know what the shade was, because like, you can still get a perfectly good education.
Like, she made it seem like the world was ending. She's like, well, I guess they don't have to choose private school. We can save some money. Get off your high horse, woman. Yeah. You know, it's very clear that, and I understand.
Don't have private school money. No,
no, seriously. And like, you know, I'm not saying you can't have high hopes for yourself or your family and, you know, try to ascertain or achieve a certain point, but also just grossly unrealistic to the point of, like you said earlier, you know, they all just put all of their hopes and faith on the nest. And then come to find out there ain't no money.
Exactly. And like, just being practical, like, you just cannot live beyond your means. Mm-hmm. And that's what she was like, she was hell-bent on doing, to craft this image and to make sure their children had the absolute perfect life. But you don't have to go to private school. You don't have to have this ridiculously expensive SAT tutor and like all the things she was trying to do for them. And like, I get it, as a parent, she wanted the what's best for them and she was willing to pull out all the stops, but you just have to be practical, because those things don't ensure success. You can still do all of those things and you end up unhappy, or her children end up unhappy or unsatisfied, or maybe not even want that route in life. Mm-hmm. And so like, I just feel like she bent over backwards trying to make this stuff happen, and it blew up right in her face.
Yeah. And I will say that is kind of like a commendable moment in the story, just because, you know, there is kind of like a lesson in how she interacts with the twins, but I still felt bad for Nora because, again, and also teenagers, she's trying to figure out everything. She's got SATs, college, like, there's so much stress. And then now she's like, oh, great, my mom, who's loved me all my life, suddenly can't even talk to me. Yeah. You know, like, that's, I don't know, that's hard to read.
As far as character development and like their arc throughout the book and then the ending goes, the twins by far had the best one. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I feel like they had way more growth than these full adults did. And it was nice at the end to see that they both kind of stood up for themselves and what they wanted. Like, Nora didn't back down from her relationship with Simone. She owned that. She owned that this is who she loved. And I like that also Louisa stood up for herself and wanted to go to art school. You know, she initially at the beginning seemed like she was going to let her mom talk her down, but I feel like they both really, really grew as people, and I was happy to see them pursue what they wanted as opposed, and you know, that was that whole recurring theme with them of like, it's not your job to be somebody else's mirror. And you know, even for them to realize that for everyone else and then for each other, because Louisa had a really hard moment when she found out about Nora and Simone, because being twins, she's like, we're supposed to be the same. We're supposed to be the same people. And that heart to heart was really nice between the two of them, because you can still be fully independent people making your own decisions, but that doesn't weaken or lessen your bond as siblings, as twins, in any way. So I guess moving on to B, what were your feelings about her?
I wanted to like her, and I felt like if she hadn't done one very specific action pretty early on in the story,
I feel like we're in agreement on what that specific action is.
I would have liked her, but what she did, much like how we're introduced to Jack and his whole, you know, bar fiasco, I think it speaks to her character deep down. And she's also, something that's interesting is she's one of the few siblings that has any real remorse for Leo whatsoever. And it's because, like, out of the four, you know, they're the closest or whatever. And there's also talk about in B's, when she was like a teenager in high school, she was essentially manipulated by this creep, this guy in her class, and Leo like stood up for her. And they also worked together. But Leo's also terrible, and he's not as emotionally supportive towards B as she is towards him.
Yes, that was something I wrote in my notes. I'm so glad you said that, because I forgot to mention it when we were talking about him. But I wrote, like, how selfish can Leo be? Because B's had his back at every moments when she shouldn't have, because I know we agree she should never have done what she did with Matilda and her family, but she had his back at literally every single moment. All she asked was for him to read her pages, and he acted like he barely had time to do it. Like, he said that when she handed it to him, he even had that whole thing about talking about how he felt frustrated and was like trying to get her out of the house. He's like, yeah, I'll take a look at it when I can. And if I'm not mistaken, a whole week or weeks went by where he couldn't even deign to touch it because what he was doing was so much more important.
Which was nothing, by the way.
Which was nothing. He's just so self-absorbed.
Yeah, and even like to that point, didn't Stephanie have to remind him like multiple times, hey, did you read B's story? And he's like, oh, yeah, I'll get to it. Like, sir, what are you doing that you're that busy? She's had your back since day one, and you couldn't care less.
And going off of what you said about B, like, that's the thing, is I wanted to like her. All the other characters, it was pretty obvious to me that they didn't really have very many redeemable qualities. And so she was the only one who, you know, initially I was like, oh, she seems fine. I feel like, you know, I'll probably like her the most. And then she did what she did. And I was kind of looking at her through that lens after that. But I feel like B, honestly, like, even though we got chapters from her, we don't really know a lot about her. And I guess that's kind of like one critique I want to make about the book, is I kind of feel like it needed to be 200 pages longer. Just because a lot of the information that we get about the characters is really superficial. We don't get a lot of backstory into their relationships with one another and why they are the way they are now as adults. I mean, we get that little blurb about Jack not liking Leo because people called him Leo Light. And we know that B and Leo are close. Leo had her back in high school, and he was the one who kind of helped her with her writing career. But other than that, we just really didn't get a lot. And as I was reading this, it kept reminding me of the book The Last Romantics by Tara Conklin. And I really enjoyed that book because it was similar feel. It was about four siblings, and it bounced back and forth between their relationship as kids, teenagers, and then adults in the present. And I feel like I had so much more of an emotional connection to each of the characters because there was a lot of time put forth in building up who they were individually and what their relationships were with each other. Like, I feel like this book just threw us in. And so that was just, it made it really hard to connect to any of the characters because of that.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point of it. It could very easily, and I feel like if it was 200 pages longer, this would be a different conversation, you know? But also, if not 200 pages longer, then a lot of the elements introduced to us, if they were cut out and kept at the same, like, you know, a little over 300 pages mark, it would have been maybe an easier story to follow, just because I know we talked about this a little bit off air, but there was a lot of characters in this book.
Yeah, I actually wrote it down as I read. Anytime there was a chapter from a new perspective, and in this, 340 page book, we had chapters from Leo, Melody, Beatrice, Jack, Louisa, Paul, Tommy, Vinny, Matilda, and Walker. And it was just kind of too much. And what we talked about in our last episode with the guest list, that worked in its favor because there were only 5 characters.
Right.
So when it bounced between, it was really easy to keep track of each character's kind of individual storyline. But this one, with it being from 10 different characters' points of view, and it would also bounce kind of randomly. So, we'd only been hearing from the siblings, and then I think the twins. And then all of a sudden we get a chapter from Paul. And you're like, wait, who's Paul? Why are we hearing from him? What's going on? And then same thing when we get that chapter from Tommy. And we get the one from Vinny. Like, they kind of just felt out of place.
Definitely.
And so I just see what you mean. And like paring that down, I think if we had kept it at the core, just the 4 siblings, or like the 4 siblings and the twins, we could have gotten a much more detailed story.
Right.
Detailed in a good way.
Right. I don't know. I understand, for example, I believe Vinny's the one who goes on to be in a relationship with Matilda. That was nice just in the sense that, Matilda definitely gets dealt the bad hand in this. And so I think his purpose was to kind of be like the light at the end of the tunnel. And they kind of do, from what I recall, like their story ends well together.
Right.
But did we really need to know about Vinny,
Yeah, like that just kind of seemed like it was just kind of thrown in. Like, oh, okay, well, that's what happened with Matilda, but I guess Stephanie ended up helping Matilda, but that whole thing of Vinny and Matilda trying to get in contact with Leo, it's just like, it was all these like really kind of seemingly random extra storylines taking place along with the main storyline. And so I feel like it just kind of made it hard to follow. And speaking about Paul really quickly, I didn't know how to feel about him because his infatuation with Beatrice bordered on like a little creepy to me. Just a little, because like he seemed like so just infatuated is the word I'm going to use with her. He was just sitting here waiting, biding time for her to kind of have feelings for him. And what I didn't like was at the end when they went to look for Leo, they didn't specify where, but they were just in some Caribbean island. And he saw him and he chose not to tell her.
Yeah.
Because it was going to ruin that moment between them of them maybe kissing. Like, that's her brother. You don't get to decide whether she knows where he is or like whether or not it's good for her to know where he is. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that was a very kind of manipulative thing to do. And if I was Beatrice and I ever found out that he did see him, I would have been livid.
And honestly, just as you said that right now, I think what you said is perfect. And I think, because like I felt weird, not always, we just read this, but as I was reading this, I felt weird about the way he described B, and like the fact that he had this crush on her for years upon years. That's fine, like people have crushes. But specifically use the word infatuation, and I felt like, so there's love and then there's infatuation, right? If he truly loved her, he knows how close B is to Leo. He knows how much B cares about Leo. So if he really loved her, it's not about the kiss. There'll be other times for them to kiss, if that's how their story's supposed to play out. But instead, he chose infatuation and chose to be selfish and just I forgot about that. But yes, I agree. And it's okay to introduce a character, but it was a whole chapter with very specific details about his work life, about his watery gray eyes, his and like routine. Yeah, and I'm just like, I get it, and I do feel like we're kind of, getting a visual of the character, but is that really necessary to the story? Because again, it's the Plumb siblings, it's the nest. That's, what the focus is.
And something I even wrote in my notes is like, the individual storylines were interesting, but it was way too kind of all over the place together. And it was really confusing. Sorry, I'm reading straight from my notes because like I want to get my thoughts as I was reading it. I said it was confusing and it feels like you're trying to get your bearings, and it would be better if it was more streamlined. Learning about Tommy and his wife and what he was going through, it was interesting. It just felt out of place in this particular story. and learning about Vinny and what happened to him. It was interesting. It just didn't fit into this particular story.
Right.
So it just felt like it was trying to do too much in the very limited time, the limited pages that it had.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. But with the 2008 recession, so, undoubtedly that had an effect on countless Americans, as it did the Plumb siblings. But I just couldn't help but think that in their heads, they thought that they were so much more affected by finances. In actuality, they were very blessed and fortunate, I feel like.
Yeah.
Especially being in New York, one of the most expensive places to live in this country. If your only concern is, are my twins going to go to private school or, public school, or for Jack, he was able to be in this relationship with someone who was financially well off and they had their situation going, and he just kept wanting more and more and more.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think for sure, the author could be commenting on this idea of like hedonism and greed and living in excess, and I get that, but I didn't feel sorry for them at all. I'm like, actually, I hope you don't get the nest so you can learn, morals and values and, love and family. That's important. Like, mend those broken relationships in your family. Maybe you'll feel more fulfilled. That nest isn't going to do that for you. Yeah. It's just going to have more money, more problems, you know?
And I hate to sound so overly critical of the characters or the book because, and that's, I feel like this is also, not everybody is going to like every single book. It's just completely unrealistic. And so these are the feelings that we have about it. And so we're just chatting about that. And I feel like one of the biggest hangups that I had, like you were saying, you don't feel bad for any of them. And I think I kind of touched on this earlier in the episode, is just like most books, TV shows, movies, you feel a way about a character because you are shown things about them that lead you to feel a certain way. I feel like this book just wanted us to feel a certain way towards these characters, but gave us no incentive. You know what I mean? I didn't feel compassion for them. I didn't feel a whole lot of empathy, and I didn't feel the relationships between them or any kind of sibling. I didn't feel any kind of way about these characters because I feel like I just wasn't provided with enough information to do so. And I guess actually I did feel a kind of way about them, but it was negative. Yeah. I didn't really like any of them.
Right.
So that was just something that was really hard for me to immerse myself in the story and kind of like relate to these characters in any way, because I wasn't a fan of really any of them except for the twins.
Right. And just kind of going off of that, I just question like if that was the intent of the author, because like that's fine, like I said, there's tragedies, and that's not even probably the right genre, but of course not everything has to go perfectly. I love a good anti-hero, I live for it, but like you said, this definitely isn't meant to be this big negative cloud. There were definitely things to like in this book. It was definitely, the writing was good. I like the descriptions of New York. Again, I can't stress enough, I've never been. So everything I know about New York literally is through literature and media and music. And so I'm picturing in my head what it looks like, and I thought the writing was really compelling. But I just wonder, like, if these minor tweaks were made to it, if I would have gotten more out of the story.
Yeah, because like you said, there are definitely there are things to like. I really enjoy the relationship between the twins. I feel like that the growth that the twins had, the relationship they had with one another, is what I wish that the Plum siblings would have had. And I guess we didn't talk about Stephanie. I don't really have any negative feelings towards Stephanie. Her journey to motherhood was interesting and unexpected. I like that she was such an independent person, that she didn't feel like she needed to rely on someone else to make her happy, and she built this life for herself that she really enjoyed. And so I enjoyed that part of her.
Yeah, she was a pretty solid character. Her position was to break the bad news if she felt like, for example, with V's writing, if it was going to be good, if it wasn't any good, if it would sell. And so she had a tough job, but I definitely felt like she was a full human.
She's relatable more so than the others.
Right. But then, how her story plays out, I felt like she was very strong. She was like, I don't know, unimaginably strong, just because I haven't had a child yet. So I can't even imagine. She had to give birth, I believe, in the side character Tommy's apartment. Or she's like going down the steps trying to go to the hospital.
Oh yeah, it was like the first floor of her apartment.
Oh, okay, yeah. So she's not even in the hospital. She's having contractions. I just really felt for her. But the whole time I'm thinking, Leo doesn't even know does he even know she's pregnant?
Honestly, though, with what we've been told about Leo, I don't even know if it would have made a difference in him leaving or not. And that's kind of the things, like, I hated to see Stephanie was so strong as a person, but like Leo had this hold over her. Like, even when he came back into her life, she specifically said, we're not having sex. This is not, you're purely my roommate. We're not getting back together. And that first night, you know, he kind of worked his way back in. And she talks about all the time she had to pick herself back up and put herself together after Leo left her. Mm-hmm. So it's just like more of the same from him. And she didn't deserve that.
Right. We kind of talked about this before the episode, but the way that Leo, just the way that he talks, the way that he thinks about women, the language that he uses, it was, I mean, I guess from the start, it was kind of clear that he wasn't going to change, but just the fact that his solution, because there was a part, like maybe a third of the way in, where the height of the novel is, I think a chapter was actually called, like, Where is Leo or something. Well, before we get into that, the whole thing is Leo going to pay back the Plumb siblings? Yeah. Because he's promised that he will. He said, give me 3 months. It's been 3 months, and we're, you know, what's going to happen? He leaves.
Yep. There's not even so much as an explanation, and the fact that he just, like, you see what's at stake for your siblings. You see that Melody has 2 kids that she's trying to put through college. You see that Jack is struggling. You can't even think of someone other than yourself for 2 seconds to think of how, not even just your siblings, but their significant others and their children, and how you bailing is going to affect their lives and how they paid for your mistake and you can't even be bothered to pay them back, even though you have the means. Leo has no good qualities, none.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was really solidified for me. I mean, in everything. But then when he went to meet with Nathan, and Nathan kind of like was like, no thanks, but no thanks about his pitch. And then all of a sudden Leo was like, well, I don't know if Paul's the right move to make. And I don't think he's the leader that you want or need him to be for this project. But he was all about Paul when he thought he was going to be a part of it. And as soon as Nathan turned him down, he's trying to prevent Paul from getting this opportunity.
Right.
He just like, yeah, he just only looks out for himself. And so I could do without him as a person in the book, to be honest. I mean, there'd be no book. So I know, I mean, as listening, you can tell, you know, we have very strong opinions about this book, but just because this is what we took from it or how we felt, everyone has differing opinions. And so I would love to hear from some of you if you've read it, or if you haven't read it yet, I encourage you to do so and let us know what you think. Did you interpret the siblings the same way that we did, or are there things that you think we misinterpreted, or how do you feel about each of these characters? I'd be very, very curious to know.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today. For more updates, you can be sure to follow us on Twitter at BookSolidPod, on Instagram at BookSolidPodcast, like us on Facebook at BookSolidPodcast, and also join our group. Please stay tuned after the outro for more information on our donation of the week.
For this week's donation, we have chosen 2 organizations, GoFundMe's Wildfire Relief Fund and Direct Relief's Wildfire Relief Fund. Currently, Washington, California, and Oregon are suffering from one of the worst wildfire seasons the West Coast has ever seen. Collectively, more than 4 million acres have burned. At least 33 people have been killed, dozens are missing, and over 5,000 structures have been destroyed. This is a very personal cause. As many of you know, Indy and I were both born and raised in California and still currently reside here. The level of destruction is unfathomable, and we want to assist in any way that we can. The GoFundMe Wildfire Relief Fund issues grants to individuals, communities, and organizations that have been impacted by the wildfires. The Direct Relief Wildfire Fund is committing $1.5 million to relief efforts, as well as donating KN95 masks, health kits, and medical resources to community health centers and emergency management departments. For more information on both of these organizations and how to donate, please visit our show notes.